This is the moment that many people, diplomats and Israelis and Lebanese, have been worrying about for the past 10 months. Is this the trigger for an all-out conflict?
At the Olympics,
1 6, 2 6, up in the air, 2 3 4.
the most decorated gymnast of all time, Simone Biles, makes her return. Turkey's parliament considers a mass cull to control 4 million stray dogs and funerals.
In the wake afterwards, you will always hear people say, oh, they would have loved this, if only they were here, would have really enjoyed this. So this gives them the chance to be part of that and actually enjoy it.
A trend towards holding them before you die.
Hello, I'm Govinda Gill with the BBC News. The Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado has asked voters to maintain a vigil at polling stations across the country to ensure there's no fraud in the counting of votes for the presidential elections. President Nicolas Maduro is seeking a third term in office. The opposition candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, says the turnout has been much higher than in previous elections.
Estamos más que complacidos.
We are more than pleased about today's journey. We'd like to congratulate all Venezuelans for the historic journey. We had a huge turnout, the like of which has not been seen for many years.
Western governments have urged Israel to show restraint in its response to the deadly rocket attack in the occupied Golan Heights on Saturday that killed 12 young people. A 4-hour meeting of Israel's Security Cabinet in Tel Aviv authorized the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the Defense Minister to determine the scale and timing of the reprisal against the Lebanese group Hezbollah. Mark Lowen is in Jerusalem.
The reports we're getting is that the pressure is on Israel not to strike in major urban centres like Beirut, for example, and then there will be pressure on Hezbollah in Lebanon as to how they would respond to an Israeli retaliatory strike, because there is a huge amount of international pressure on both sides at the moment, coming from the US, from France, from the United Nations, from the European Union, on both Hezbollah and on the Israeli government, not to allow this to escalate into a full-scale regional inferno, if you like.
A high-profile former cabinet minister in Britain, Suella Braverman, has walked out of the race to lead the opposition Conservatives, saying that most of her party's members of parliament disagree with her. The former business secretary, Kemi Badenoch, is the latest to announce her candidacy. Ellen Catch reports.
Kemi Badenoch pledges that under her leadership, the Conservatives would, as she puts it, speak the truth again. She says the party's renewal needs to start from first principles. That, she says, means a belief in the nation-state, which should serve its own citizens above all else. She says public services have not fully recovered from the pandemic and will never do so until, in her words, we remember that government should do some things well, not everything badly. She also says there must be a renewal for capitalism, which she claims has become a dirty word.
The organisers of the Paris Olympics have said they're sorry after Christian groups condemned parts of the opening ceremony as making a mockery of Christianity. Criticism has focused on the scene involving dancers, drag queens and a DJ in poses similar to depictions of the Last Supper, the final meal Jesus is said to have taken with his apostles. BBC News. An international team of scientists say they found new evidence to back up their theory that complex life on Earth began 1.5 billion years earlier than previously thought. The team analysed sediment taken from deep inside a rock formation in Gabon in Central Africa. Regina Reinhardt has the details.
This theory is a big departure from conventional thinking. Most experts agree that animal life emerged 635 million years ago. But this team say they detected an explosion of the nutrients needed for life, including oxygen and phosphorus, 2.1 billion years ago. They believe two continental plates collided and caused underwater volcanic activity. This made an environment that could support life similar to slime mold, a brainless organism that reproduces with spores.
Italy's Prime Minister, who's on an official visit to Beijing, has signed a 3-year economic plan with China. Giorgia Meloni made the announcement during a meeting with the Chinese Prime Minister Li Qiang. She said she wanted to relaunch cooperation with China in new fields like electric vehicles and renewable energy. She wants to rebuild ties after Italy pulled out of China's Belt and Road Investment Initiative in December. The Turkish parliament has held an emotional debate on a law that would clamp down on the country's 4 million stray dogs. If passed, it would allow the killing of sick dogs and those deemed to display negative behaviour. The fine for abandoning canines would rise 30-fold. Animal rights advocates have called for a sterilisation programme instead. Jordans welcome the inclusion of a village dating back 2,000 years in the UN Cultural Organization's World Heritage List. The tourism minister said UNESCO's decision to list Al Jamal was a great achievement and a source of pride. He told the News Conference he hoped it would encourage more visitors to Jordan. BBC News.
Hello, this is Alex Ritson with the Newsroom. We start in Venezuela, where people have been choosing their next president. It was largely a race between Nicolas Maduro, who's seeking a third consecutive term, and the opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez, although experts have voiced concern the election isn't fully fair. Polls closed a couple of hours ago and results are expected shortly. Our America's regional editor, Leonardo Washer, joins me now in the studio. Leo, any results yet?
Well, not official. We had an unexpected announcement from the opposition leader Maria Corina Machado and the opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez. They looked very optimistic. They said they have results. Counting has begun. They started and they said it's quite positive, but they are not allowed to release the results before the government, before the Electoral Commission. What they said is that the turnout, which also they can't reveal, but they said it's been the highest in many years, which is seen as positive for the opposition. And they said that the voting went on in peace, the day started in peace, and they hope that we'll end in peace with a celebration in the next few hours.
But the government was sounding fairly optimistic too, and there have been major concerns about whether the election is free and fair.
Yeah, that's important to say. I mentioned Maria Corina Machado, but she's really the opposition leader. She wasn't allowed to run for alleged basically tax fraud, failing to declare her income. So there's been all sorts of problems. Many people didn't find the names on the list. People, that almost 8 million Venezuelans living abroad, many people haven't been able to vote because they have to prove that they are legally in the country. So there's many things that happened during the campaign that basically was against the opposition. But on the day itself, things went ahead in peace, and the government is saying that the system is reliable, the voting system is reliable, that they're very confident that they're going to do. The opinion polls say that President Maduro is seeking a third term in office, straightened by a wide margin. We'll have to see, and what will be crucial as well will be, whatever the result, what the reaction will be from the United States and from neighbors, important neighbors like Brazil, like Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, to see if they validate the election or not. But I think we should have a result in the next 1 or 2 years.
There were long queues at polling stations, and some concern that there were people who weren't able to vote.
Yeah, some people were not able to vote. They said they didn't find the names. Others, they couldn't register, which happened before. But we didn't see this time, having in previous elections, intimidation from the police or the army, or what they call puntos rojos, red points, where you have people from the governing party close to the polling station. So in that way, you can say that the election on the day went ahead largely okay, peacefully. But many people still feel that the government won't accept the defeats that will put an end to 25 years of socialist ruling governments in Venezuela. And President Maduro seemed very calm and very confident that he was going to win the elections. So we'll have to wait and see.
Leo, thank you. Leonardo Washer. Western diplomats and politicians are scrambling to de-escalate tension between Israel and Hezbollah following Saturday's rocket strike on the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, which killed 12 young people. As fears grow of a major war, they're urging Israel to show restraint in any military response. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a 4-hour emergency meeting of the Security Cabinet late on Sunday. Earlier, the White House also blamed Hezbollah for the attack. It denies responsibility, claiming a projectile from Israel's Iron Dome defense system in the town of Magdal Shams. The victims of Saturday's attack belong to the Arabic-speaking Druze community, a distinct religious and ethnic group that makes up 1.5% of Israel's population. Earlier, the funerals took place for the children who lost their lives. Our correspondent, Paul Adams, spent the day there.
A really profound sense of grief and shock that has descended on this small Druze community in this rather remote corner of the country. This is the Golan Heights, which have been under Israeli control since 1967. This is a community that is very tight-knit, that clings to its roots, a place where people have not left, despite the large evacuations that have gone on elsewhere across northern Israel in the last 10 months. The Druze community here in the Golan has stayed put. But of course they have feared all along that something like this could happen. And sure enough, it has. And it has left them absolutely stunned. Here's just a flavour of what today has been like. Through the streets of Magdal Shams, the coffins came one by one. This town is reeling in shock, consumed by collective grief. For months they feared a disaster, but they never imagined it would take away their children. At the football pitch where they died, people came to pay respects and take in the scale and speed of this tragedy. A playground transformed in an instant into a place of jagged metal, discarded belongings, and in the corner, the blood of the victims. As government ministers arrived, the mood turned. There was anger, even from a soldier. They've been bombarding us for 10 months, he shouted. My children are crying every day. Israel's hardline finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, was here. Some urged the government to crack down hard on Hezbollah. Others told him, in no uncertain terms, to leave. Ugarit Abu Awad knows a response will come, but is deeply fearful.
There should be a response, but I don't think there should be no outpour. The more people are gonna die on all sides. Humanity is already suffering it.
The Security Cabinet has been meeting to discuss this. What kind of response might be expected?
This is a difficult calculation. This is the moment that many people, diplomats and Israelis and Lebanese, have been worrying about for the past 10 months. Is this the trigger for an all-out conflict? Something much bigger than the simmering tit-for-tat exchanges we have seen for the past 9 or 10 months. There are no immediate signs of a large-scale military operation. We're not seeing the mobilization of troops and massing of armor on the border, no immediate sign of an invasion of southern Lebanon, despite the Israeli government's keen desire to create some kind of buffer zone in southern Lebanon that would prevent Hezbollah from being able to launch rockets into Israel. But as you say, the Security Cabinet has been meeting, and the statement that was released following that meeting said the members of the Cabinet authorised the Prime Minister and Defence Minister to decide on the manner and timing of the response. No clues there. I think everyone is expecting some increased level of Israeli military activity. Whether it will amount to the kind of full-scale escalation that people fear, well, we just don't know. An escalation on this border could have all sorts of ramifications, could worsen the conflict in Gaza, could wreck prospects for ceasefire talks there, could draw Iran further back into this conflict. There are all sorts of implications, all of which are pretty dire.
Paul Adams in the Golan Heights. It's the end of day 2 of the Olympic Games in Paris, and the action is coming so thick and fast it's hard to keep up. Here's Alfie Habersham with the highlights.
And here she is starting her qualification on being the piece.
It's not easy to be the centre of attention in a room with Tom Cruise, Lady Gaga and Ariana Grande, but the whole of Paris appeared to hold its breath as a sparkling crystal figure tiptoed onto the edge of a large mat.
Opens with the big change leg mount and then into the leap series, pike back somersault.
Simone Biles returned for her first Olympics since Tokyo, when she pulled out due to mental health problems, and her limbs were tucked into unknown angles as she flashed across the floor and over the beam so fast you could blink and miss it.
Unbelievable dismount, 1 flip, 2 flips, up in the air, 2 twists. Wow.
Snoop Dogg certainly didn't, lifting his sunglasses as his eyes appeared to lurch out of their sockets. She's already the most successful gymnast of all time with 23 gold medals, and the USA will be hoping she can add another after a dazzling qualification. And something's definitely in the water in Paris, and I don't just mean the pollution in the River Seine that's caused the triathlon training to be cancelled, but also a volley of comebacks. Team GB's Adam Peaty was cruising towards a record of 3 Olympic golds in a row in the 100-metre men's breaststroke, when Italian Nicolo Martinenghi thrust through the water to finish before him by just 200th of a second. And France's Léon Marchand put the hose back in the headlines by breaking Michael Phelps' record in the 400-metre individual medley. Meanwhile, the clay courts of Roland Garros were dusted off for an old friend, Andy Murray. The 37-year-old was supposed to be retiring, but said last week he'd come back to Paris for one last go. His worst fears looked to be coming true when he and doubles partner Dan Evans were creaking towards defeat against Japan's Taro Daniel and Kie Nishikori. But then, somehow, the pair withstood 5 match points and won.
Who writes his scripts?
Even he looked like he couldn't believe it. And look at his mum Judy, who admitted she was working out which flight to catch home and watching him in the stands. But she said her son is someone you can never write off. Having said that, age and experience isn't everything, because what were you doing when you were 14? Well, Koko Yoshizawa will certainly be the talk of the school playground after grabbing gold in the women's skateboarding street final. Her kickflips take Japan to #1 in the overall standings.
Alfie Havisham. You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. If you walk down the street in Turkey, it's only a matter of time before you spot a stray dog. They've been a neighbourhood fixture there for centuries, but that may be about to change. The Parliament is debating a controversial law that could lead to mass culling of the animals. Anna Aslam reports.
Millions of dogs roam the streets of Turkey, which the government says is a problem. A new law would allow the killing of stray dogs that aren't adopted within 30 days, and those who are sick or deemed to display negative behavior. The fine for abandoning pets would also rise 30-fold. President Erdogan says it's necessary to control the population of stray dogs that he says have become a menace to society, attacking people, causing accidents, and spreading disease. But the legislation has sparked nationwide anger and emotive arguments in Parliament. MPs were seen jostling one another and exchanging insults, opening another deep divide in an already fractured political landscape. Some local authorities have said they won't apply the law even if it's passed, and animal rights activists have described it as inhumane, calling instead for sterilization programs. A recent opinion poll shows nearly 80% of the public supports measures to take dogs off the street, but less than 3% believe collected dogs should be euthanized.
People could be as well-intentioned as they want, but this law has loopholes. The gaps need to be filled before it's put into practice.
Those who govern us should know this well. Please don't make politics over animals. Please don't. It's not very difficult to keep them alive.
Many people accuse the government of using this law to distract from political issues. President Erdogan's party suffered heavy defeats in local elections this spring, and the country is grappling with a worsening economic crisis. Despite the nationwide uproar over the legislation, it's expected to pass in Parliament later this month.
Anna Aslam. Today, a record number of children in sub-Saharan Africa are enrolled in school. According to the UN, 90% of students under the age of 10 still struggle to read and understand simple text. One country that has recently invested massively in education is Zambia. What difference has it made? Laila Mohammed has been investigating.
Since 2021, Zambia has spent over $1.5 billion in making primary and secondary education free.
Without free education, I don't know how my parents would have managed to take me back to school.
18-year-old Mariana is one of 2 million students who's been able to return to education. But the opportunity of free learning has also created new challenges.
I'm at Chinyana Junior School, about an hour's drive south of Lusaka. Here, free education has brought hundreds of children back into the classroom in such a short time. This has created challenges of overcrowding and a shortage of teachers.
Cleopatra Zulu is an early childhood education teacher at Chinyana.
When I started, I had at least a smaller number, 40, but this time around it's 105, 80, 90, and that's just one class. It's a challenge. Even marking, we have even reduced even the number of subjects that we are giving them.
Many students have to sit on the floor because of lack of desks, which has a negative impact on their learning. But the government in Lusaka says it's listening and it's taking steps to address the challenges of free education.
This is a good program.
Mr. Douglas Siakalima is the education minister in Zambia.
Our government the children in a congested classroom rather than in the streets. What the president did was increase mass production of desks. Mass infrastructure building is happening.
The Zambian government has hired more than 37,000 teachers in 2 years, but with some still recovering from a debt default. Some experts have cast doubt over the sustainability of the free education policy. The Minister of Education says he is confident they can bear the cost.
Laila Mohammed. There's a comic Irish folk song called Invitation to a Funeral, which ends with the line, "Never go to funerals until the fella dies." The joke doesn't always work these days because a number of terminally ill people are choosing to hold so-called living funerals before they die. Why? We've been getting the views of some people in the UK.
Our son passed away in November last year after a 2.5-year battle with leukemia. It was a week short of his 34th birthday when he passed. He had the terminal diagnosis, so he decided that he wanted to have a living funeral. He wanted the chance to say goodbye to friends and family and for everyone to celebrate his life.
The living funeral is for the patient. I don't know about you, but I've been to many funerals, sadly, and in the wake afterwards, you will always hear people say, "Oh, they would have loved this, if only they were here, they would have really enjoyed this." So this gives them the chance to be part of that and actually enjoy it. They say their own eulogy, they reflect on their life, the good, the highs, the lows. It is more about that celebration of their own life and having that final party that they'll ever have.
I had breast cancer, which metastasized to my brain, and then I was given months to live. I didn't want to have a funeral where I wasn't involved in it. I wanted to say a really fond farewell to all the people I loved and the people who loved me. I wanted to be there and share how peaceful I was feeling. It was so emotional, and I just got to hear how people truly felt about me, and it was so special. There were songs, A Little Help from My Friends, which was very pertinent to me, but it was the Joe Cocker version.
Let me up.
Thinking that the funerals are about them. Obviously, funerals do need to celebrate the life of the person. They do need to talk about how they have contributed to this world and to this life. But to only have them about the person and their life and what they've given to this world is neglecting the really important part of funerals, enabling people to realise that the person has now gone. And that is often the beginning of acceptance, which in itself begins the grief journey. To have the funeral before the person has died is actually feeding into a culture of pushing death away and denying death, and actually accentuating the problem of people not processing grief, which is a worrying thing because suppressed grief leads to problems, not least our mental health problems that we have today.
shock return to the Marvel superhero world after 5 years away, but not in the Iron Man that launched the multi-billion-dollar franchise. So who would he? His new character was unmasked at the Comic-Con event in the Californian city of San Diego this weekend as Paddy Maguire.
16 years, 33 films and $30 billion in box office takings later, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has floundered in recent time. Profits have been down. There's a slight, perhaps understandable air of superhero fatigue. So when stars joining the franchise were unveiled in Hall H at the Comic-Con event, the anticipation among fans was palpable. Was their universe going to be saved? And if so, by whom? Flanked by a posse of hooded figures, Dr. Victor Von Doom, one of Marvel's biggest villains, appeared on stage in his beige green cloak and slowly lifted his iconic metallic mask. The fans had lost their minds. Robert Downey Jr. to play a mega-villain known for his sorcery and science.
New mask, same task. What did I tell you? I like playing complicated characters.
A major twist from good to evil. After all, the actor made his debut in 2008's Iron Man, the alter ego of Tony Stark, a self-described genius, billionaire and playboy philanthropist. Modesty aside, Iron Man is a classic anti-hero, flawed but heroic. He's one of a team of superheroes, the Avengers, that first appeared in the Marvel comic books written by Stan Lee. Downey's role in the first Marvel movie was instrumental in launching the blockbuster universe.
I am Iron Man. The suit and I are one. Determining Iron Man's suit will be determined for myself, just tantamount to either servitude or prostitution, depending on the state. You can't have it.
Downey became one of its biggest stars. 10 films later, he last appeared 5 years ago in Avengers Endgame, when his character was killed off. Joanna Robinson is a podcaster and the author of MCU, The Reign of Marvel Studios.
What is most important to know is that ever since Robert Downey Jr. left Marvel in Avengers Endgame in 2019, Marvel has been on this sort of steady decline in terms of the fandom, critics, and most critically last year, box office. And so I think the idea of Robert Downey Jr. coming back, the first star, the guy who started it all at Marvel Studios, is this idea that we might return to form for the Marvel movies that people have loved so much in the past.
With Deadpool and Wolverine, a movie pairing two of Marvel's most popular characters, opening this weekend, and already well on its way to becoming the highest grossing R-rated movie of all time, could this be the start of a reboot for the Marvel Universe? Avengers Doomsday is due for release in May 2026.
That report by Paddy Maguire. We're still waiting for results from the Venezuelan general election, presidential election. The opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, has asked voters to maintain a watch at polling centres across the country to guard against possible fraud in the counting of those votes. We'll keep you updated in the hours ahead. Thanks for listening to The Newsroom.
In an hour, Crowd Science wants to know why a ship is a she.
Protagoras was the Greek philosopher. So if you look at Greek, there are two noun classes. He called one group masculine and the other group feminine. He was convinced that sex, biological sex, male and female, was inherent in the classification of all things.
Then, people fixing the world here's how sport can change a life.
I came to France because of the sport. Now I live in security in France. So sport totally changed my life, and also it gives me the feeling of freedom.
And at 3:30 GMT, the conversation sits down with two music therapists to discuss how music can ease some symptoms of dementia.
I've got singing, and singing seven verses this time, and the husband called her friend and said, "You didn't remember me, you know, program." And yes, she was trying.
That's all coming up on the BBC World Service.
Dr. Chris Van Tulleken is on a mission to find out what we're eating, why we're eating it, and who or what might be influencing our decisions. And he's starting his quest to uncover food truths with the most eaten meat in the world, and one of the most numerous animals on our planet, chicken. He's asking how much any of us really know or want to know about where our food comes from. Join Chris Van Tulleken for Fed Planet Chicken after the news.
BBC News with David Harper.
Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado has asked voters to maintain a vigil at polling stations across the country to ensure there's no fraud in the counting of votes for the presidential elections. President Nicolas Maduro is seeking a third term in office. A meeting of Israel's security cabinet, convened by the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has authorized him and his defense minister to decide on the timing and manner of the response. The Israeli military has told Palestinians in part of the Bureij refugee camp in central Gaza to leave immediately for their own safety. It has told them to go to an already overcrowded humanitarian zone in Al-Mawasi further south. A high-profile former cabinet minister in Britain, Suella Braverman, has pulled out of the race to lead the opposition Conservatives. She said there was no point in running when most of her party's members of parliament disagreed with her. So far, 6 candidates have put themselves forward to replace Rishi Sunak. An international team of scientists say they found new evidence to back up their theory that complex life on Earth began 1.5 billion years earlier than previously thought. The team analysed sediment taken from deep inside a rock formation in Gabon in Central Africa. Italy's Niccolò Martinenghi has won the men's 100-metre breaststroke final at the Paris Olympics. He beat Britain's Adam Peaty into second place, denying him a third consecutive Olympic gold medal. Jordan has welcomed the inclusion of a village dating back 2,000 years in the UN Cultural Organization's World Heritage List. The tourism minister said UNESCO's decision to list Al-Jamal was a source of pride. The Italian Prime Minister, who's on an official visit to Beijing, has signed a 3-year economic plan. Giorgia Meloni said she wanted to relaunch cooperation with China in new fields like electric vehicles and renewable energy.
We have 30 seconds of your time to ask you a question. For the BBC, so this is the RSPCA label, these are Red Tractor, that's Soil Association. Do you know what any of these labels mean, or have you ever seen any of them?
Not really, no.
Not that I can think of.
I don't look out for them, being honest.
Welcome to FAIR, with me, Chris Bantam, investigating why we eat the food we eat and what that means for the planet and ourselves. I'm out on my local high street in Islington. I'm trying to speak to busy shoppers. I've got a clipboard in my hand, a piece of paper. Pretty understandably, most of them are avoiding me. We're making a show for it. We have 30 seconds of your time.
I'm really late.
Don't worry, don't be late.
But a few people are stopping, and I'm showing them 3 different logos that you find fresh chicken buy in shops.
Have you ever looked at any of these labels on the packets of chicken that you buy?
Absolutely. I eat meat, but I want them to live a good life before I consume them.
I'm deeply skeptical. I mean, the food thing, it's one portion of this. It's all part of the machine, isn't it, really? I feel like I do care, but I haven't, thought about it like that. You know what would be good, now that I've thought about it? If there was actually a standard where they were like, we're not going to let you put this on the shelf unless it meets a few different criteria, and then we won't have to think about it.
It's a revolutionary idea, but he's not the first to have it. In fact, that's exactly what these 3 logos that I'm showing you will indicate. So most people seem to have no idea. Obviously, this street survey is completely unscientific and just offering random costs by. But most of them do seem as confused as me about where our food is coming from and how it's produced. And this is weird, because food isn't just something that keeps our engines running. It's the stuff that unites us, binds us together. But simply, it's important. And I think it's something that most of us want to care about. But that can be hard on us. I'm trying to understand a complicated relationship with what we eat through the story of a bird that's become the world's most prolific protein. This is Series 1, Planet Chicken. Welcome to Episode 5, Fine Print. I'm going to unpack what we're told about the chicken we buy and whether we can trust that information. But brace yourselves, there are going to be some hard-home truths about our food choices. I'm raising my own chickens for meat, 4 of them, and this is part of my attempt to understand what it takes to put meat on our dinner tables.
3 different breeds, but even the 2 fast-growing birds won't be ready for a few more weeks. So in the meantime, most of us are going. And as I'm shopping, I've noticed that, like many of the people I spoke to, are making assumptions about how that chicken was produced, without always checking, or let's be honest, understanding what's on the label. I'm not entirely sure what information we're given about the meat we're buying, or whether we can trust it. Hi, Chris.
Good morning, Chris.
This is going to keep things simple. It's very nice to see you guys. Chris Elliott's a professor of food safety at Queen's University Belfast and Thammasat University in Thailand. He's a man who knows a lot about food trends, from illness to fraud. He tells me there's this popular story about the birth of food safety laws that goes back to the death of Zachary Taylor, the decorated 19th century war hero and the 12th president of the United States.
It's a really interesting story, actually, that he probably died from food poisoning. Nobody's quite sure because there was obviously no ability to test at that time, but the likelihood is that he ate unsafe food.
The story goes that on a hot, humid 4th of July 1850, President Taylor joined the Independence Day celebrations around the Washington Monument. The craggy-faced general, nicknamed Old Rough and Ready during his army years, wandered through the crowds enjoying festive refreshments, chilled cherries and iced milk. Now these days that might ring some alarm bells: a hot day, warm dairy, ice from dirty water, vendors with grubby hands. But food hygiene wasn't really a thing back in the 19th century. By that evening, Zachary Taylor was in bed with severe stomach cramps. The doctors weren't sure what was wrong, but his condition steadily worsened. 5 days later, the president was dead.
Within about 20 years of that, food labelling legislation started to be introduced. But actually, the first food labelling in the world was in the UK. And what drove food labelling in the UK was fraud. There were so many food products that were being adulterated that the government at the time said we have to do something about this because people are being poisoned. And they introduced the first food labelling about 1870. And then after the introduction of that labelling came the first public analyst laboratories in the world to actually test for the authenticity of food.
So food safety laws are really well established. They've been around for more than a century, countering scams and so on. But what about production standards? That's where things get less clear.
The main information you will get will be what's called country of origin, and that's where the chicken was raised and slaughtered. And you will also perhaps get information about the way that the animal has been raised, whether it's been free range, whether it's organic, some of the different aspects of production that we like as consumers and are willing to pay extra for.
So if there are things we're happy to pay more for, how do we identify them? Well, when it comes to fresh chicken, that's where the logos from earlier come in. Each of them says something about how it was produced. First, and by far the most common, is the little red tractor logo, which sets out standards for everything from the breed to how it's killed. That label will specify one of 3 levels. There's Red Tractor Certified, which is the basic one, and it's just a little bit above the UK's legal requirements. These are fast-growing indoor chickens. Then there's Enhanced Welfare, which is for slightly slower growing birds with more space, more enrichment, but they're still indoors. Finally, there's Free Range, again, slower growing birds, now with access to the outdoors. Another logo you might spot is RSPCA Assured, which is specifically about welfare and sets out rules around breed, space, enrichment, handling and slaughter for indoor and outdoor systems. Then there's Organic, which again sets standards for the entire chicken raising process, but as I discovered a couple of episodes ago at Dalesford, the chicken feed can't contain antibiotics or be grown using pesticides. These birds are always free range. And on top of those logos, supermarkets might have their own set of chicken standards as well. But can we trust what we're told on the packaging? Chris Elliott says size matters. If there's a short supply chain, then broadly the answer is yes, we can trust it.
So in the UK, we actually have a relatively small number of poultry companies, but they all tend to be very large, and they're also what are called fully integrated industry.
We've heard about the big 3 before: Moy Park, Borough Foods, and Two Sisters Food Group. These are the companies that control the majority of the UK's chicken farms. And that could sound a bit worrying, but Chris says these integrated systems do have their benefits.
So those companies control the farms, they control the animal feed, they control so many different aspects. So they have really good systems in place of tracking and tracing. And you know, I would say if it says it's produced in the UK and it's free range, it's 99.99% likely that that is the case. As you go further afield outside of the UK, that probability drops quite dramatically. Actually, if it comes in processed foods, the chances are it probably did not come from the UK, and the likelihood is you'll see virtually no information about the source of the chicken in your processed foods.
I'm starting to think that we buy chicken in two quite different ways. There's the fresh stuff, which we get from our supermarkets or butchers, and then there's the chicken that Chris just mentioned from further afield, which we buy already processed into a sandwich or a pie or a curry. And it strikes me that not only is there a difference in the information that we get about these two types of chicken, there's a difference in how much we care about it. We'll come back to that. First, I want to understand how trustworthy those logos in the supermarket really are. Chris says they're reliable. But, like most of us, I've seen headlines about trusted farms supply meat to major supermarkets and are supposed to be getting checked up on, but they then get caught doing something cruel or unsafe. Now, I accept there's a legitimate discussion to be had about whether farming standards are high enough. But whatever you think of the standards, my question is, are they being adhered to?
So you put your feet all the way to the bottom, so the foot's going to go all the way to the floor, and then the fluid will go all the way to the ankle depth, so all the runners disinfected.
Why the security?
Welcome to a real-life chicken farm inspection. Well, sort of. As close as my producer and I are likely to get turning up with BBC badges and a full-on recording kit.
So, as we do the walk around, I'll need to see, of course, inside the beds, the site itself, where you keep your fallen stock, anywhere where you make your disinfectants.
I want to know if these schemes can be sure that farms are sticking to their standards. And although most of the shoppers I asked hadn't heard of them, Red Tractor is the biggest food assurance scheme in the UK. They have 2,500 poultry farm members, and you find their logo on about 95% of chicken. So I'm hoping they'll be able to answer some of my questions. They've invited me to join them for a demo inspection on a Lincolnshire chicken farm that's owned by Moy Park, one of the big three.
We've got 4 sheds.
Yeah.
Okay.
What we would want the consumers to understand is when they see the logo, they can be assured that that product is British and has been farmed.
Sophie Elwes is the scheme's poultry technical manager, which means she oversees the chicken standards. Red Tractor monitors the whole chain, meaning it sets standards for everything from the chick hatcheries through to slaughter. As I said earlier, they're a little higher than the legal baseline. But I still don't fully understand why this kind of accreditation is necessary for farmers or consumers if there are already national laws in place around basic chicken production.
We come out to our members every single year, or more frequently where it's necessary. But if you're not a member of a scheme, then there's no guarantee that anyone is coming to check that those standards are being adhered to.
Okay, so with Red Tractor, at least you're getting minimum of 1 inspection per year.
So all of the audits are carried out by third-party independent experts like Zoe, who you'll hear from today. So she will collect all the objective evidence, and then all of that will go to a certified reviewer to make sure that it's truly independent and incredibly robust.
With the inspections, are they surprised, or do the farmers know the day that Zoe is saying to go?
The vast majority of inspections are announced, and there's a couple of reasons for that, one of which is biosecurity. So Zoe will be going to a number of different farms over the course of the day, so they have to be able to plan that she's not sort of cross-contaminated from one farm to another. That said, we do have an unannounced inspection programme where farmers will have no notice of an auditor turning up.
Ahead of us, I spot the inspector Zoe Rawson coming out of the chicken shed, jotting down notes. She works for an independent audit company, NSF. I ask what she's particularly looking at.
The key thing for me is bird welfare. That is the most important thing on any audit. So I'm here to come and check that the farm is adhering to the welfare standards within the standards, and then that what they are telling me and showing me on farm is corresponding with the paperwork.
Zoe talks me through the ways that farms can fail trips to missing medical records. And I get the impression that most of the time, when farms are in breach of standards, it's not because they're deliberately cutting corners to save money. It's because there's human error. Maybe there's a staff shortage, or the farmer's having a personal. Out of 100 farms like this that you inspect, how often do you suggest that someone is suspended from the scheme?
Not very often.
After the walk around, the other thing to check is the farm records.
As you know, it's a sample process, so I'm going to various different documents. It's back of what we've just seen.
While Zoe's rifling through the paperwork, I persuade Matt, the farm manager, to join me for a cup of tea in the yard. Now, he's been doing this job for over 20 years. He's one of the most committed chicken farmers I've met. In fact, I can't think of the last time I've met anyone this committed to anything that they do.
It's more of a lifestyle than a job or a career. 24 hours a day call, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The welfare of my birds comes first, above everything. So my wife is a chicken widow at times. If the birds require my assistance, then the birds get my assistance first and foremost, above everything else.
Tell me about how in tune shoppers are with this sort of red tractor label. Like, do you have friends who don't work in the poultry industry who don't really get it?
Yeah, I do. I don't think the customer going and buying a chicken in a shop for £5 understands what goes into doing that, the costs involved into doing that, and the legislation and the auditing purposes and the standards that are behind that red tractor stamp.
So me and my local shoppers, we aren't the only ones that are clueless about food labels. As the inspection comes to an end, I catch up again with Sophie from Red Tractor, and I want to ask one last question about their scheme. This is the ticklish one, the one I imagine lots of you might be wondering. We've all seen in the press horror stories where, even with Red Tractor certified farms, there are reports of them having terrible welfare standards. How common is that, and how do you feel about that?
So it's really distressing when we see images from undercover exposés that show poor welfare and suffering of those birds. We take those very seriously, and where we can substantiate those claims, we do suspend members. One of the frustrating things is that a lot of the time the undercover footage is heavily edited and extremely subjective about looking at maybe a handful of birds in a shed at night, and they also compromise the biosecurity of the farm and stress out the birds, so it's not particularly helpful. But I think one of the really frustrating things about exposés is that generally the compliance for red tractor poultry farmers is very, very high, and where we do have substantiated allegations where people aren't following those standards, it risks the reputation of an industry that's incredibly professional, incredibly hardworking, and I think that's a real shame.
So you're doing 2,500 inspections a year, roughly.
As a minimum.
As a minimum, and then some other hands runs and so on. How many out of the 2,500 lose certification?
Not that many. Some members will be withdrawn from the scheme. Our preference would be to suspend a member in order that they have the opportunity to improve their standards. And that's one of the really encouraging things we've found about our risk-based protocol, is that it has really driven up and improved compliance.
So how many members would you suspend?
I genuinely don't know the answer to that, sorry.
We cannot.
I could come back to you with that.
Red Tractor did come back to us. Now, they have around 45,000 member farms, and this isn't just chickens. Across that portfolio, they suspend around 4,000 farms per year, and that could be for minor non-conformances that need fixing or for bigger things. And of those 4,000 suspended, about 400 members annually are withdrawn completely, so a little under 1%. To be honest, that was higher than I was expecting, and they were unable to give us poultry-specific figures because of data protection commitments to members. I understand that today's inspection was entirely for my benefit, and I wasn't expecting to see any problems. That doesn't take away from the fact it was an impressive setup. It was a roasting holiday. And the the chicken sheds were a nice place to be. They were ambient, no smell, lots of contented looking chickens in them. I'm fairly cynical about these things, but I am left feeling that Red Tractor is better than no Red Tractor. And it strikes me as well that it is in Red Tractor's interests to police things pretty tightly. When one farmer's caught doing something bad, it decreases public faith in the whole lot. And the farms aren't exactly in competition like high street businesses. When everyone meets the standards, everyone wins. And this takes me back to what food safety guru Chris Elliott said. When you're buying fresh chicken from the UK, you're generally able to buy it, provided you want to check. But here's where things get murky. So far we've been talking about fresh, raw chicken, stuff that's right to go. Of course, that's not the only chicken. Every year we buy masses of processed products. In fact, in the USA and the UK, up to 60% of the average diet is ultra-processed food. We're talking pies, pizzas, sandwiches, curries, kebabs, nuggets, ready meals, tin soups, all those convenient foods that millions of us turn to every day. And most of the time, there's nothing on the pack or the box or the tin to say where that chicken's from or how it was produced.
It's interesting, just us as human beings, when you get more complex foods, we tend not to care so much about that. And it's not just chicken, it's every ingredient.
That's a good thing.
So the likelihood is you'll see virtually no information about the source of the chicken in our chicken pie or other processed foods.
By processed food, do you mean microwave ready meal, a sandwich, pieces of chicken that we might buy on the high street?
Yeah, absolutely. Where it's mixed with other ingredients, any form where it's not fresh, basically.
And where are the main places that the chicken in those processed products, pies and stuff, where does it come from?
The really big chicken producers in the world, Chris, are Brazil, which is number 1, Thailand, which is number 2. Also in European terms, Poland is a really big chicken producer as well, and we import a lot of different parts of chicken from Poland.
According to Chris, the major chicken producing nations do so much lucrative international business, they're pretty reliable at keeping up with global standards. If bad practice is exposed on one farm, it's bad for everyone. But of course, lots of countries produce chicken, places with smaller industries with less scrutiny. If I was, say, a small takeaway looking to buy frozen nuggets or a sandwich maker wanting affordable shredded chicken in bulk, where would I get it?
So then it becomes really difficult to answer that question, because generally in those low value products, the companies that produce them will have sourced that chicken from wherever they can buy the cheapest possible chicken, and you know, they will not really ask for full traceability about that. Where did it come from? All of that information will be very, very opaque. And you know, again, there's been cases where some of that imported chicken has been tested and has been found to have very high levels of antibiotics in it, for instance. And that is a clear sign that all of those standards, the European standards, the US standards, have not been met.
But in my head as a consumer, I'm imagining there is some system of policing. Isn't it all checked at the border and there's some big old certificate with a rubber stamp?
I mean, there's no shortage of certificates and no shortage of rubber stamps. Always the question would be, how reliable is the information on that certificate, and what check was actually undertaken before that rubber stamp was put onto it. We get tens of thousands of container loads of food coming into the UK every day, and I would love to tell you that it all gets checked and inspected, but it's probably less than 1%, just because of the sheer complexity of it. Because a lot of the people who were doing those inspections, there aren't the same number of people anymore. So it would be relatively straightforward to import food into the UK that has had no checks or inspections now.
So it could be from an intensive process that involved antibiotics, perhaps hormones, extremely low welfare and extremely low hygiene standards.
All of the above, yes.
So the cheapest, most convenient chicken products, sandwiches, pies, frozen meals, tin soups, they don't have to tell us anything about the chicken we're eating. They might not meet our usual personal food standards. We might not know how it was produced, where it came from, perhaps even whether or not it's safe. And the interesting thing is, we simply don't ask. I know this because I visited some of the places that sell processed chicken in my neighbourhood. shops, restaurants, cafes, takeaways.
To all the different chicken shops, I just wanted to know, do you know anything about where you get your chicken? Do your customers ever ask where you get your chicken? Do they care?
I've only been asked about the shrimp, about the seafood. I've never been asked about chicken.
What are you buying today?
Just a chicken burger meal box.
Do you ever think about where the chicken comes from?
I thought about it before, but not in that. I'm not really intrigued about it. I just buy the food and eat it, really. It's the food, isn't it?
Not a single member of staff had ever had any customer ask about either chicken welfare or origin. More than that, no one in any of the shops knew where their chicken came from, aside from the name of the supplier. What I can't figure out is why. Most of us do seem to care about what we eat to some extent, at least for some of the time. And yet, even when information's on the packet for us, we don't seem to pay much attention to it. And when it's not there, we're not asking why. I put this puzzle to Chris Eckert.
If food is expensive, as fresh food is becoming unbelievably expensive, we care much more about where it comes from, how it's being produced. And then, as you go into frozen food, that's more about convenience food, it's more about lower cost food. So our values in what we buy change quite dramatically. And we are in the middle of this unbelievable cost of living crisis. And what is very clear is people's shopping trends, habits have changed quite markedly. Where, a lot of us do say we care about the food that we eat, where it's produced, how it's produced. The cost has really pushed people into saying that's maybe something I'll have to come back to at some later stage when I can afford really to think about this.
This seems like a major problem to me, and one that goes way beyond traceability, because it says a lot about us and how we think about our food. When it comes to this fresh chicken that's clearly from an animal, we do put thought into what we're buying. But when it's that other, less visible type of chicken that's already been neatly processed into something else, there's that distance that I heard about right at the start of this series. It's not recognizably a bird, so we can disassociate ourselves. We turn a blind eye to our usual meat morals. And this is how we eat most chicken. These processed foods, the ones we turn to when we're hungry, tired, and rushed, when we don't have the energy to ask questions of the food or of ourselves. Ultimately, it seems like many of us are happy to turn a blind eye to our normal food standards when it makes our lives easier. Next time on Fed Planet Chicken. We might say we want to make better chicken choices, but when it comes to the most processed forms, we just can't get enough of them.
Junk food culture is so normalized. Yes, I know this about my food system. I know how I'm being exploited, but I'm still gonna, reach for a burger once in a while. Like, there's no way we can be independent from the exploitative food system that controls all of us.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and here's what's happening in the studio this week.
Willard Wiggin creates the smallest handmade sculptures in the world. He uses high-powered microscopes, hypodermic needles, and paintbrushes made from eyelashes. He shares insights from his creative process, which blends art, science, and patience to challenge our perceptions of scale.
In the studio, Tuesday at 12:30 and 21:30 GMT. In 30 minutes, crowd science with Anand Jagatia.
This week, why do some languages have masculine and feminine nouns? So a table is feminine in French, neuter in Gujarati, and English doesn't give it a gender at all. So what's going on with these confusing categories?
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.